Support is provided in part by Conway Shield. Those who answer the call and risk it all for the safety and well-being of others deserve someone willing to give their all in return. Conway Shield is built on the shoulders of 3 service legacies. Customizing the nation's very best firefighting shields has expanded to providing the most effective technology, tools, and training for today's fire and law leaders. Learn more at conwayshield.com.
Today's episode is part 1 of a 2-part conversation. Hello and welcome to our annual Year in Review episode on the Leadership Under Fire Humanizing the Narrative podcast. I'm your host, Tim Clark. In this episode, I'm joined by LUF founder Jason Brezler and LUF's senior man, James McNamara. In this conversation, we reflect on the range, depth, and reach of Leadership Under Fire's team efforts in 2024. The LUF team has maintained its commitment to humanizing and optimizing performance and leadership in today's fire service and other high-risk industries through programs, research, and publications. Gentlemen, welcome to our 2024 Year in Review episode.
Thanks,
Hello.
Tim.
Tim, how are you? Good to see you.
In 2024, the Leadership Under Fire team proudly continued to deliver a considerable number of programs and seminars while also undertaking several new initiatives. Throughout the year, the LUF team enjoyed the opportunity to deliver human performance programs to organize across the country. Jason, do you want to share some of the highlights that LUF has achieved in 2024?
Absolutely. 2024 was quite an eventful year for LUF on the human performance optimization, mental performance, MPI, mental performance initiative front. We were able to continue to build on the programs that are underway, certainly here at home with the FDNY, as well as in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Baltimore City, the Baltimore City Fire Department. They entered the fray in 2024 formally, or began their journey formally and programmatically. We were there for two separate week-long courses with some of their best and brightest and most experienced folks. That was certainly one of the highlights of the year. We went out to Contra Costa, California early in the year, spent several days with them on 2 separate occasions, helped them offered some education and enlightenment and encouragement to them as they start to build their campaign roadmap, and they're doing some really exciting things. And then just last week, we spent a week up in New Britain, Connecticut, department outside of Hartford, had a number of their performance leaders, as well as a few folks from adjacent and surrounding departments. And now they're underway, and I think on a path to being able to build out a sustainable campaign roadmap. And all of these departments, New Britain, Contra Costa, the Bay Area of California, Baltimore, Cherry Hill, you could argue that they're probably more different than they are similar in terms of the operational activity, the types of fires and emergencies that they respond to, their staffing, their resources. One in the spectrum, you have a department that's arguably resource abundant, like the FDNY. On the other end of that spectrum, you have a department that's arguably resource impoverished, like the Baltimore City Fire Department. But I think what a week-long immersive course affords folks when they hear from the likes of Dr. Charles Andrew Morgan, right, Andy Morgan, Fader, Hattie Huseman, Jimmy Mack, Chief Jeff Fasinelli, Jake Dutton, etc. When they're exposed to 15, 20 bona fide human performance thought leaders, many of them, bona fide subject matter experts, and that's not a word that I use loosely. It affords them a much greater appreciation for the opportunity that it is. And there's that moment throughout the course of the week where everyone in that room who's seen the elephant that is at a fire emergency realizes for the first time, like, there's a scientific explanation and there's a common operating language that provides some validation to that experience that is like, and there's a path. They can allow people in organizations that are committed to take their game to the next level. despite all of the challenges. And what's great is that there's, to some extent, there's certainly a resource requirement. Like the department has to be able to secure funding to get guys offline for a week and backfill those people. But beyond that, the resource requirements are pretty modest, right? And you educate, you enlighten, you encourage, and you empower these people young, right? Some of them 5-10 years, which isn't young by military standards, but is young by traditional fire service standards. And you make these people dangerous, and when I mean dangerous, I mean in a really constructive way, not the least bit destructive. And it's these departments, their leaders are seeing the opportunity that is, and they're capitalizing on it. And we're continuing to build out this informal team of teams, where folks are networked to folks outside of their immediate tribe, and it's been a really exciting year on that front. It was some pretty logistically intense weeks in terms of getting guys everywhere where they needed to be, guys and gals, and of course, if nearly all of our team's cadre and contributors, they're all guys and gals that still actively have skin in the game, right? They're working in the firehouse, they're going to school. They're as in your case, they're drilling in the reserves, military reserves. They're raising kids. They're taking care of their parents. They're buying a house. Their plate is full. But as Tim Moore likes to say, from Captain Timmy Moore, Cherry Hill, my plate is full, but that's okay because I'm freaking hungry. It's been an awesome year, and I think to watch another line I'll borrow from Timmy is we've been able to take, in many of these departments, we're taking human performance from being a sidecar, and we're making it the principal and primary engine that's going to propel and drive us into the next generation in the American Fire Service.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. A couple of thoughts I had as you were speaking. One was in witnessing people go through, and one, as having gone through a week-long immersive course and having witnessed people go through an immersive course, there's usually midweek, a giddiness that happens among the people who are taking the course, that you can tell that everything that's been discussed throughout the week is starting to land, starting to hit home, and they start having their own ideas on how they can improve their departments. There's just a giddiness that kind of takes over, which is fun to see. I think, it's a pretty impactful week. The other thing is I had my Spanish teacher in high school said something that always stuck with me. And it was, if you need something to be done, look for the person who's busy doing a lot of things, because that person will find a way to get it done.
Sure.
If the person, if you're looking toward the person who doesn't have anything going on, the person is probably not going to be able to get it done. That there's a reason why that person doesn't have anything going on. So I think, I'm preaching to the choir with this audience, but
I think that speaks, that certainly matches the personality of virtually everyone on our team, as well as all of the folks that we encounter in our travels to work with different departments. They're all people that they certainly don't need to take on another project. In fact, they would probably, you could make the argument that they perhaps shouldn't. And their spouse or partner at home would probably argue that the last thing they need is another project. But they're precisely the type of people that that you want to sink their teeth into this.
Yeah, I had this conversation with Gabe and Jemmy the other day, just about how it seems like there should be a finite amount that people can take on. At the end of the day, of course, there is. There are sacrifices that come somewhere in taking on all these endeavors. But again, some people just you find a way. You find a way to get it done. Do you find whether there's a department that has different needs, based on the types of emergencies that they're responding to, or have, are resource restricted departments? Do you find that you need to tailor the program to these different needs, or is human performance such a universal concept that it goes beyond that? It doesn't. You don't need to tailor it. It's
yeah.
Universal.
In the words of Sid Hale, right? God rest his soul. Chief Warrant Officer Fife, Sid, who was a contributor to the Endeavor, a longtime Marine, and a longtime law enforcement leader in Southern California. The principles are universal. It's the application that's contextual. And to some extent, it's a human performance initiative. I would argue more broadly, it's a leadership initiative. And I think because some of the core tenets were borrowed from the maneuver doctrine, which is kind of central to being a Marine, at least in certainly recent decades, the more challenges you're confronted with as a leader, as a department, the more it resonates with you, right? So I think using Baltimore, for instance, you'd be hard-pressed to find a department that's as resource constrained as they are, where like your ladder truck goes out of service. It's not like the shops bring you a spare for the day or for the month or for a year. Not uncommon to get a pickup truck for this foreseeable future and be relegated to taking any EMS runs, right? And maybe in some instances, the department might even have an apparatus temp loaned to them from a rural jurisdiction. So, you're conditioned to drive a Seagrave. Well, now you're driving an aerial that's not a Seagrave, right? So, I mean, imagine living in that world, like more times than not. That's probably much more comparable to being a Marine and, or a member of a ground combat unit in rural and austere Afghanistan at the height of the war there than it is to being a firefighter in much of the United States. Right. So it's almost like that mindset that says like challenge, but yet they're all opportunities, right? It's how you frame it. But I actually think the departments that it perhaps resonates with them the most. What's been really cool about the initiative, and I think some of it speaks to the extent in which we've been incredibly intentional and deliberate about everything that we've done, is in every single instance, like there has not been an instance where over the course of the week, somebody in the class has been confrontational and gone on record and said, I appreciate what you're doing, but none of it actually matches with my personal experience on the floor above, or at a wildland fire, or during a hurricane response to inland North Carolina with floodwaters in excess of 20, 30 feet. No one has said, hey, that curve, that might be for everyone else, but that's not us, right? Or this perceptual distortion you speak of, like, yeah, we're not plagued by that here. Or technology, no, we've found the perfect relationship to employ technology at fires and emergencies, and it's done nothing but enhance our performance, right? Like, it's the underlying tenets and concepts resonate with everyone, from the junior guy who's rather inexperienced, and they resonate most with the guys who have been to the most fires and emergencies, the Liam Flahertys of the world, who have arguably been humbled the most. So it's cool to have a philosophy and a language and a roadmap that can be tailored to fit any organization that's in the business of doing the sorts of things that we do.
One of the initiatives you didn't mention was LUF's Emerging Leaders Development Course, which is for and by emerging leaders with 5 to 10 years of time on the job and experience. So it's, junior members helping to empower other junior members. Jim, this question's for you. I get the sense that this is one of your favorite Leadership Under Fire initiatives, and I can say that as a beneficiary of a lot of your wisdom and tutelage, I can see why. But can you talk to us a little bit about why that would be maybe one of your favorite LUF initiatives?
And Tim, you are correct. It really goes back to, you think about the great ones. They took the time to teach. They didn't care how much time you had the job, right? Because they knew how challenging this profession is, how dangerous this profession still is. And this is a profession also where one day everything's good and the next day you're no longer on the job. Like, you have to build the people who can replace you, the people who can be force multipliers. And you look at the young ones who are in the course, it's extraordinary. And I draw a comparison from those who were on the job, pre-September morning in 2001 into what they are today. The academic talent just defies comprehension. And it's not just in the big cities. You look at, Gabe and Jemmy's guys, Tom and DeAndre. My Lord. I mean, these guys DeAndre is going to run the world, and Tom is going to put out every fire in the world. There's no stopping. And I'm preferential, to Joanne Mariano and Tom Miller, because I've spent a lot of time with both of them. To think that all of these incredible young men and women, they have the bulk of their career in front of them. Like, that's going to shape and mold what they do, not just in the firefighter rank, but in the officer rank, and hopefully up into even the chief rank. Like, they're going to not just be force multipliers, they're going to be change agents. And to have that gift as a young one, I could only dream of having that when I was 30. But again, it also comes down to identifying the talent in your organization. I still say that the single best thing that came out of MPI in New York was about identifying talent. And the only way you can find them is building relationships with the people you work with. They're out there, right? Find them. And you equate this to maneuver, right? Not just finding them, build relationships, establish mutual trust, empower them with the mission order, and they're going to do extraordinary things. And they're also going to carry this LUF endeavor forward as well. You think of when this started, Tim is still young, Jason was young, I was never young, but none of us are going to continue on forever. And if you believe in how right this mission is, and it is, then you need to have those who are going to replace us. For another reason, they see the world differently. Mm-hmm. I always ask my young guys and gals, right, how do you see this problem set? Because they view it from a completely different vantage point. Their life experiences are different. There's no better or worse. It's how they see it. It's their world today. And leaders from the top down should understand how they see it. They have so much to offer, and they can make their organizations better. And it's imperative for leaders of all ranks, right, to take the time to know them, to understand them, right, to tap into that growth, to tap into the energy that they bring. Youth brings boundless energy, and they all possess that.
I would argue you have pretty boundless energy. You can say what you want about the youth, but Jim McNamara is young beyond his years. In the books you consume, the influence that you bestow, you have also boundless energy. So don't sell yourself short. Yeah, I think to touch upon what you said a little bit, I think a lot of outsiders or look at our organization or look at our types of organizations and look at our run totals, look at our time spent, quote unquote operating, and don't understand that even outside of the operational realm, there is a job to be done. There is training and teaching and drilling that happens outside of our runs. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was actually she's become a pretty highfalutin writer out in Hollywood. And I tried to explain this to her. She's like, what do you do when you're not going on runs? What do you do? I think her perception, she was born in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. That's where I know her from. She's now, again, living out in Hollywood. She was a writer on This Is Us. And I tried to explain it. I was like, we practice. And it sounded silly to say out loud, but she was like, what do you mean you practice? I was like, yeah, we practice going to fires when we're not at fires or not at emergencies. And I said, just take your line of work, for example. What if you had to, write once a week or once a month? And that was the only, you're not doing that. You write things that never see the light of day to be good at writing, to maintain your good practices at writing. And we're no different, and so to belittle us to just what we do in operations and just the time we spend in operations is taking a lot away from what we do as a department, as a job.
Sure. Even today, people have no idea what firefighters do. And that's a failure. That's a failure in a lot of different, perspectives. Even elected officials don't understand that. And I'm going to put little bit of my union hat on now. there's not enough time in the day to train the way we should. Your friend has all the time in the world to work on writing. We don't have that. Your friend, when writing a script, isn't placing their body on the line, right? I mean, the more we dig into this, and we're going to hit it a little more later, the more you hit and understand this profession. Jason uses the term, we're a profession without equal. I think at the end of the day, you're going to have to change that term. We're so far beyond that, right? And
to that point, to this conversation, two thoughts come to mind from my vantage point. First is the universal moment of enlightenment that exists during a week-long immersive MPI or UF human performance course is the moment that you and Jake, or Jake, right? Or you and Jake together deliver a somewhat abridged version of what it is that we've learned from our endeavor to quantify and qualify psychological and physiological stress at fires and emergencies. That's the moment where people who have been fervent students of this vocation for 30 years are taken back by the quantifiable, the quantitative metrics. We as a profession, I don't think we fully appreciated the cumulative stress profile. The other thought that comes to mind is, and we've been sharing our perspective, our observation, and our criticism, and a resultant criticism now for a couple of years. When a fire operation ends, and whether it ends favorably or it ends catastrophically bad, and there's a critique done, whether it's informal or whether it's formal and rigorous, which is generally the result of it ending tragically, those that end favorably, we commonly talk about how they receive much less scrutiny. All of the analysis in terms of tactics, techniques, procedures, communications, evaluations, judgment as to whether or not it was an appropriate tactic or technique, or perhaps inappropriate. You name it, right? We've all been privy to many of these formal or informal processes, and occasionally formal, particularly when the outcome is tragic. But the analysis is always confined to what happened from the receipt of the alarm to the moment that companies took up, which is most unfortunate, because much of what determined what guys did or didn't do or could have done or should have done or might have done, or like all of those really important substantive conversations about what people did tactically and operationally, inclusive of their communications, was probably overwhelmingly determined prior to the receipt of that alarm. And it traces back to their earliest days in probie school. It traces back to their initial drills, their first night tour in the firehouse, and how guys treated them and how guys drilled on them. It traces back to a fire where they were out of position and how that was handled, whether it was handled with dignity and there was learning, or whether, like all of these interactions that for that moment in time are arguably like trivial or insignificant. That's the collective body of work that is freaking preparation. Right. And I think then to connect it to our endeavor to quantify and qualify these, now I think we're north of 1,500. I mean, just in the past couple of days here in the city, there's been a couple of really good fires. We've got some really compelling data sets just from the last couple of days, fires where we had multiple operators collecting data, operating different places on the fire ground. But when you look at the data and the first reaction people are seeing is they're taken back. They're almost awestruck. Like that's our guys. That's a 46-year-old man. That's a 56-year-old man. That's possibly a 61-year-old man standing in front of the fire building. Not a guy that probably went through buds, right? Not a guy that's playing professional sport and largely living a life of luxury when not competing rigorously. No, this is a guy who largely lives a very modest and ordinary life, and is called to do extraordinary things. It's the preparation, right? It's like Mattis. I mean, he was most articulate. The warrior monk that was Mattis, but you spend 30 years preparing for an operational decision that you might have 30 minutes to work through a planning, a tactical and operational planning process. But largely where you're going to go during that 30-minute planning process was determined by what you did the last 3 years, or in some instances the last 30 years of your professional and personal lives.
I worked in Ladder 3060 on December 16th, which was the 21-year anniversary of the Tommy Brick fire.
Sure.
And I felt I owed it to his legacy. I actually reread the Fatal Fire Report that day, which I haven't read since I was a probie. Now, probie, I was before I'd done the week-long MPI course, and so the lens through which I was reading that Fatal Fire Report was dramatically different than the lens through which I read it the first time around. Like to your point, like there was a lot more reading between the lines this time around, reading that Fatal Fire Report.
Yeah, and perhaps we'll talk about Fatal Fire Line of Duty reports here in a few minutes. But when you go back and read a report like that, as informative as it is, because human performance wasn't yet acknowledged to the extent it has been in recent years, the reader has no choice but to read between the lines, right? Because there's a lot of attention to kind of how the building behaved, how the fire behaved, tactics and techniques that were applied, some of the decisions that were made, but that was that. I mean, talk about a deeply and in intense human experience, right? For the guys that were operating, most notably, obviously Tommy Brick. Mm-hmm. I think what I love is one of the things that's uniquely different about the fire service, because inevitably when we talk about line of duty analysis, which we might, when we talk about the reporting process and investigations, we continue to provoke thought and offer some criticisms. Diplomatic, I like to think, but we offer some criticisms as from a human factors perspective. But one of the things that's uniquely special about the fire service, the FDNY, but nearly every other fire department, is that people are intentional about taking the time to revisit that event 21 years later. Right? As squared away as the military is, outside of like really, really significant events like the Beirut bombing, the Marine barracks, right? There's I don't think that there are too many instances where people sit down years later in a unit and say, hey man, let's take time today and remember those that went before. Let's memorialize, let's honor their sacrifice. Let's try to learn from this event in a constructive way. That's unique. That's unique to our profession. Once again, I think in that regard, we're without analogy.
You mentioned earlier the work that a number of us have worked on regarding the biometric data and our ability to analyze human performance, and I think you hit the nail on the head that our data right now, as compelling as it is somewhat limited. We are able to show how much wear and tear on a daily or weekly or even monthly basis. What we don't have very compelling data on is the impacts over a 10, 20, 30 year-long career. Although we have, I would say, pretty substantial anecdotal evidence on that, just not quantifiable, which brings me to the next question. Jim, you took a hiatus from the job in 2023 due to illness. You returned to the farm this year for the week-long leadership development course. You have some personal and professional changes happening this year. And I'm just wondering how your experience at the farm with what you've been going through this year, like what was that experience like?
The farm is always the highlight of the year. In some respects, it's a means of getting away from some issues because you're surrounded, by great people from the four corners of the nation. And it's a time to meet and to learn, to grow together, to spend time with old friends, Gabe and Jemmy, Chief Paul Conway. And also to meet people. I mean, my Alaska boys, Josh, Carter, and Jarrett, to be in that setting, like that immersive setting, it maximizes the learning experience and the personal experience. It's extraordinary how strangers can meet each other on a Sunday evening, and by Friday afternoon, they're almost in tears, man.
Or they are.
Yeah. And, we often forget, especially here in this city, we forget that we're human beings. We really do. And it also reassures you that there are good people out there, really good people. And it's easy to say that, the young ones can't do this. Nonsense. And we have good ones all over the place. And hopefully they'll become the change agents in their departments and in their part of the country. And it's a humbling experience, man. You think you know a lot, and then you meet people who've experienced and done things you can't imagine. And as far as the second point, it was an interesting year, both ups and downs. I've had health problems the last several years. I've been running on vapors for a very long time. And, I go for a medical on the job, and they pick up a few things. And I can't tell you how many guys I've counseled over the years to say, well, this is what's going to happen. This is what it feel like. And this is what you should do. And yet when you're the guy it happens to, it was like a boatload of feelings in one shot, man. I was enraged at first, I finally had a summer vacation. That helped a little bit. Being in the country is therapeutic. And for a little bit, I was like kind of feeling bad for myself. And we're in Baltimore, and we're doing some of the tactical drills, and I'm doing them, and Hannah is standing there, and we're talking with each other. And she asked me, like, what's going on? And I tell her things. And she goes, well, hold on. Like, why if you, wait, you're still going to teach people? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you're still going to be without you? Yeah. She goes, what's the problem? And I'm pretty good with verbal judo, but I just got smoked. So, it's like what's happened to us, those of us who were on the job in that September morning. I've written about this. It defies quantification. Why are we alive and so many good men are not? But I've become to grapple with it. It's not there's not a finality to my life here. There's just some issues, and I'm coming to grips with it slowly. But like when you're attached to something for so long, and have been through so much, in other times it'd be like, yeah, no problem. But man, what we have been through, and and snap of a finger, and that's how it ends. So, like even going to the firehouse is like a hard thing to do, man, because you're in limbo now. And that's like the worst thing. I'm still gonna be part of LUF and still do, the things that I can to help. But it's a tough transition. I'll be all right on the backside, but it's just really, it's hard to fathom, And then you move to the other end, you can go from like the lowest of lows and like go to like the best accomplishment you've ever had. The work that we're doing now academically in support of the things that you and Jake are doing, that Jason, myself, and Andy are doing. is so deeply profound. I thought I knew this job, and everything I thought I knew is now changing. And that's fantastic, because if you're really willing to be legitimate, you have to be willing to change your mind. But the things that we're doing now, most recently with our partners in Cherry Hill, who have been so generous, Zach and Tim, this is going to be an epic game changer in this profession. And a lot of people are going to be put on their toes, and a lot of people are going to have to defend positions that they took. But at the end of the day, this is going to make the lives of the men and women on the street so much better. I think of my own experience in my company. I mean, we were like one of the first to really start exploding in runs. Extraordinary men and women, what they've endured. And to see like how all of this running and the gear, the impacts that it's had on them and so many others. Like, there's a moral component to this as well. Like, these are human beings that are being so negatively impacted, and we now have the ability to change that. And so life is, the continual up and down. And that was my year in a nutshell. But I'm still alive and still here.
Do you have any advice or recommendations organizationally who are maybe dealing with a member who is struggling with illness and long-term effects of the job? Do you have any advice for them on how to handle delicately what could be a very challenging transition for that person?
I'll take that from two perspectives, Tim. Jason talks about the military. When you're done, you're done. We don't do a good job of helping people separate. There are people you can talk to because, the longer you're on this job, your network is that big. I have an extraordinary network, you too, right? Among many others. So if you have the network, you're fine. I don't know the situation in other departments. But I would take another perspective that Jason broached this several years ago, that people in really high activity companies should spend at least some portion of the year, preferably in the summer, like taking a blow. And at first I was enraged with that. I mean,
they're just going to hit me.
Yeah, for sure. But he's right. And we should think about this organizationally. Like to find, I remember pre 9/11, there was like a mini rotation thing. Like if a guy wanted to take a blow, you could swap with him. But just help those in these high volume companies to give them a time just to throttle down, right? In our profession, there's no off season.
Yeah, I was going to mention this earlier. I mean, now it's perhaps even more fitting than it was even a few minutes ago. Given where Jimmy took the conversation, the first time I mentioned it to him, he had like a visceral reaction. I thought he was gonna hit me, but then he took a breath and it resonated with him. And then we go out to California to Northern California. I might have mentioned this during a previous podcast conversation, but one of the things I love, one of the things I love about Northern California, and I think Jimmy's been out there, and Jeff Fasinelli, several of us have been out there on numerous occasions. But one of the things I really like about that region when it comes to the fire service is they have an appreciation for the fire service's past and tradition, in the San Francisco and Bay Area. But they're very progressive, I think, societally. So, but while still maintaining a reverence, appreciation for history. And one of the things that they were doing in Con Fire and Contra Costa, I think that they were probably introduced to some of the biometric project through us, but they're using data to inform decisions about when guys take certain periods of respite. So if we're truly tactical athletes, which we are, right? No, I mean, first of all, no one in the military, I wouldn't say no one. Many people could join the military and go 20 years and never generate a single data set that's comparable to what our guys are generating 15, 20, 25 times, some of them perhaps even more, a year in a real world operational environment, right? A non-artificial training environment, right? So it raises the question is, if we're tactical athletes and the data's, I would suggest the data substantiates that we are, and then some. But if we are, then when's our off season? And if we're a generation that gives credence to evidence-based data, right, that's validated by the scientific community, and we're going to our decisions are going to be informed by that, then I think we need to take meaningful measures to at least consider, like, what does that cycle look like, right? The notion that a guy could go to 26 truck or 37 engine on the 26 truck and spend 30 years there, and outside of vacations, which even being one of the senior guys on the job as a firefighter, he's at the mercy of a lottery. That's that's wrong, right? But the notion that you would spend outside of limited medical leave, which is in an event where you've been injured, right? Presumably in the performance of your duties, limited to beyond that, and your vacation, you have no off season for 30 years, right? You don't have to be a physiologist to know that there's a price to be paid for that. You know, if I look at my peer group of guys, I mean, there were times where we'll probably talk about, particularly in light of your year, the transition from being a firefighter to being a company officer. I will tell you, like you probably already noticed, like there were times where I considered remaining a firefighter, particularly in light of the company, you know, the fact that I was working where I was working. And one of the luxuries, and it's not even a luxury, but one of the things that's been afforded me as a result of getting promoted and going offline for 4 or 5 weeks of school, or even doing a week-long MPI course 2 weeks a year, or spending a little bit of time in a firehouse is a little bit slower than would be to my liking, but that's where the job has me, so that's where I am for that season. Those are not necessarily things I like to do. I don't like to go offline for a week. I certainly don't like to go off the line for five weeks, right? And I would rather not work in a firehouse that's particularly slow, right, by New York City FDNY standards. But if I'm looking at this objectively and taking my ego and my identity that I'm like, you know, into the job and I want to go to as many fires as possible, if I step back from that from a moment and say, I'd like to think I am that, but I'm also somebody who's now 46 and aspires to live a long time. I'm also somebody who has 3 little kids at home that I arguably had later in life. I'm also somebody who has, like, as much as significant, as important as the fire service is to me, right? This job, not arguably, there are things that are more important to me, right? Namely my family. But if I look at this objectively, those periods of respite are essential. You know, and we have guys in our job that have gone 30 years without an off season. There's no, I mean, an NFL quarterback, arguably a very demanding position. The guys play 16 times a year. And Major League Baseball is a grind, right? It is an absolute grind. But it's largely a static game. If you're a pitcher, you have 20 outings a year. You live a life of luxury if you're good at what you do, and you have an off season. I don't care if you're a tier 1 operator and you're the world's, you know, you're the swinging, you know what, of tier 1 operators. You have a deployment to dwell cycle, right? You go on range, you come home, and then you go to the schoolhouse environment, right, where you're going home to your own bed every night. You're not running around in an operational environment in full kit. You know, you're a teacher. I think obviously a very demanding profession, particularly for, you know, grade school grade school teachers, they have an off season. We don't have an off season, and I look at Jim with tremendous admiration for the grind that he endured for 30 years. But sometimes when I watch him walk, right, or I just through some of our interactions and knowing him as well as I do, sometimes I'm a little frustrated that he didn't get to enjoy an off season outside of his vacation and limited medical leave. Now, the generation that went before us, they did 30, 35, 40 years, and we've talked at length in several conversations why they were able to do that. Despite the fact they were even going to more flyers, they were doing a lot less runs, and the load carriage was a fraction of what we have today, and arguably a much not without it their challenges, but the scope, span, and complexity of the work environment was much increasingly straightforward compared to what we have today. I don't necessarily know that you'll see guys stick around that long going forward. But if the expectation or the hope is that guys are going to or aspire to, we've got to change the paradigm.
Especially with my union hat on, the tier 3 benefits right now disincentivizes people from staying longer than 25 years at this point.
And that has to be changed because there's no on-ramp for the next generation of staff chiefs. Like, how are they going to stick around long enough to be like the next generation of the guys and gals who lead this job?
Yeah.
It's such a shortcoming. I mean, the change was made in 2009. We're sitting here on the cusp of 2025. Right? It's just a failure to understand, like, basic. You and I do the same job. You don't have the same benefit package as me. The idea of just constantly, driving to the bottom has consequences. Because if you drive them to the bottom, what is their incentive to be as good as the generations before them? It's so imbecilic.
One observation, or one thought as it relates to Jim's transition, and he and I had a couple of heavy and hard conversations, particularly going into the summer, where I felt like he was conflicted regarding like when he was going to start that transition, and I just offered my insight and certainly encouragement. But the one competitive advantage that he has is he has this, right? And really, Jimmy brings so much credibility to the table that. And he's become such a force multiplier and an intellectual powerhouse in a way that few people ever could when they start this endeavor at 52. The things that he's working on with Andy Morgan and company, like, I mean, generally speaking, if you're teaching tactics, like guys want it, like, there's a life cycle, there's a shelf life to all of that. But in many ways, like the last decade of his career, like he reinvented himself. And reimagined himself and developed a skill set that he didn't have prior, and that's going to propel him, And one of the things that we're very intentional about as a team is you guys spoke about this earlier, is empowering the next generation, the emerging generation, earlier rather than later, and that was a gift that was given to me, and it's only right that I pay it forward. Something that we're also very intentional about is being inclusive of guys who have retired, and ensuring that we're attentive to their perspectives, and we're not being progressive to the extent that it could hinder or hamper our performance in ways that maybe we don't foresee, but somebody with 35, 40 years of wisdom, hard-earned wisdom might. So what I love about the MPI experience is you go through the course, and if you're sitting in the classroom, during that week, you're hearing from somebody who has less than 5 years, who has limited experience. And at some point during the week, there's a fireside chat, and it probably will feature somebody that has 35 plus years of experience. So you will conceivably have somebody in the room during that week who's 24 or 25 and somebody who's 70, if not north of it. That's special, right? And I think one of the things we've done in Baltimore, we just did it last week in New Britain, a lot of times guys on these jobs, respective departments, they retire. They'll hang out with their peers, they'll golf, right? Rarely, if ever, do they come back and contribute to the conversation. And it's been really cool to see Baltimore implement that. Like their fireside, we've done 20 plus fireside chats. I mean, we've done dozens and dozens of fireside chats. It was something we developed like in LUF's infancy, where we had guys like Cat Vidge come back and speak to groups. But the fireside chat we did in Baltimore, I think most recently in September, ranks amongst the one of the best. And those guys too, when they retire, one is they sleep, right? And because they're sleeping, like we were joking about this before we started to record, but because they're sleeping, they very quickly they start to look younger. They're getting good, consistent sleep. They're not living in a garage. They're probably perhaps not eating a little bit cleaner than they might, and they perhaps quickly or not quickly they begin to kind of divorce themselves, detach from that identity that is that I'm a firefighter, and it becomes more of like I was a firefighter, right? So it's a little bit less central to their identity, and that process allows them to be a little bit more, I think, candid and vulnerable, particularly about those like shortcomings that like gnaw at all of us, and watch guys be able to come back and put the cards on the table and be like, all right, let's reflect on a fire where I've walked away proud of my performance and satisfied. All right, let's talk about one where I walked away completely humbled, frustrated, disheartened, and it took me some time to overcome that. It's a cool arc to that, to be able to humanize the narrative in that fashion. And bro, like this guy, he's not leaving even if he like he's telling me he was gonna move overseas and all of that. Like if he does, he's got to start an LUF chapter in France or wherever he's gone. Like he's not walking away. He's become too much of an asset.
An enormous asset. I mean, for somebody like me, a young officer, coming up on 10 years, I will definitely take more from you in this setting today, or your contributions in leadership under fire, than I will from you at a gas leak at 4:00 in the morning. Like you will help me more by doing what you're doing right now. So I said to you before, like you will never not have relevancy in certainly the New York City Fire Department, if not the. If I
could be selfish and make this about LUF for a minute, inclusive of the FDNY's all things advancing human performance and mental performance, starting here at home first and foremost, right? Because that's what this ultimately is all about. Knowing what we know and some of the questions you posed earlier about the long-term, the longitudinal of effects, the chronic effects of working in a place that where guys and gals are subject to the grind, that level of grind. The moment Jimmy stopped going to work physically in the firehouse, but he's still, obviously still in the job and he's still working on several important programs in an offline capacity. But the moment he stopped working in the firehouse, he instantaneously became an even more significant intellectual asset for us. So I'm bummed to know that he's not going to be driving a rig. I won't see him at fires. Yeah, as his friend, I think that though hard, this transition is good for him. I mean, he hung in there a lot longer than most do. Many would have cried uncle a very, very long time ago, and they would have gone to a quieter place. But as it relates to the work that he's doing with guys like Andy Morgan, man, it requires. It's not for the faint of heart, and the fact that I know that he's home sleeping in his own bed consistently and not doing 8 runs after midnight every 3 or 4 nights is actually it's good. It's actually better for the team, and it's better for Jimmy.
There you
All
go.
right, let's move on here, boys.
I was gonna say I could tell Jim is getting squirmy and all this admiration. Join us next time as we continue the conversation on LUF's 2024 Year in Review.
The Leadership Under Fire podcast provides a platform that helps to prepare performance leaders to navigate the moral, mental, emotional, intellectual, and physical rigors in high-risk and ultra-competitive settings by developing strength of mind, body, character, and critical thought. For more on this, visit leadershipunderfire.com.